All right, so just to remind you guys who our lovely panelists are. So starting on the far here is Kevin Budelman. He's president of People Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Next to him is Seth Mroczka. He is now the, I want to say creative operations lead, but that doesn't sound right.
Director of Operations.
Director of Operations. Oh, you might want to turn that mic on too.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Director of Operations at T-Brand at the New York Times in New York City. And next to him is sitting Jill Stevens. Jill is the vice president at Baker Brand, in Los Angeles. And then our last speaker you just heard from, Jen Scully, who's the creative operations lead right here in Minneapolis for Target. So we're gonna kind of dive into some of these questions. I, of course, have some questions I'm gonna get started with as well. And just grab our attention if you wanna follow along. So we're gonna go ahead and get started a little bit. And I'm gonna start you guys off with kind of a tough one, but I think it's in spirit of Seth's presentation. So I actually got a question from Desiree on Twitter, and it was really interesting because basically the question was, what's your biggest mistake that you've made? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry to start it off so tough, but that might be a good introduction in the theme that Seth started of learn from my mistakes. So I don't know who wants to start with that, but it sounds like it'd be a good way to kind of reintroduce you guys to the room here.
I think when I think back to the biggest mistakes I've made, it always comes down to mishires. Everybody does them, but it kills me that I've done them more than once because I feel like I should have learned my lesson the first time. And that goes not only for independent contractors, but for full-time staff as well. And of course, the biggest lesson learned moving forward is always to nip it in the bud, which is also a big mistake, is not kind of correcting it quickly enough. And I think Kevin and I have a great lesson, a good saying from somebody we know and have in common, share in common. The best thing you can do to fire somebody or to let somebody go if they're not the right fit, it's like knowing you're going to throw up, right? You feel sick about it, you feel sick about it, you feel sick about it, and you know it's going to happen, and you know it's inevitable, but once you do it, you feel so much better. So you should just kind of know that you have to do it, and you need to get it over with, because until you do, you're just going to keep feeling sick about it.
Probably I'll put this under the guise of process, but when I first joined Target Creative, we were kind of undergoing the hey, we probably could build frameworks, do things a little bit differently, and I leveraged my most talented project manager on the team, okay? My most talented, to say, hey, how should we do things? And you know how you have those people who they're just really rock stars and they kind of believe that everyone around them are doing the exact same things as them because they're like, that's how I work. And what I learned, a mistake I made, was when she said things like, yeah, we all do this, that my 25 peers and I, we all do this. And I'm like, okay, I was new to this, right? So can the team do it? Oh yeah, we already do it today. Oh, fabulous. Okay, so we rolled out this major process, and we come to find out that actually nobody is doing it, and we have some severe skill set gaps too in actually being able to do it. So we sort of released this whole thing into the wild, only to find out that really she, in her own talented way, she was doing it, but no one else was. So I think the lesson that I had even going forward was when making process changes, make sure you actually also include your weakest link, just to make sure that it's something that can land on its feet.
I thought about this for a little bit now, and I think my biggest mistake, it's more of like a personal thing that I have to continually remind myself, is that I tend to always default to making the best decision for myself rather than the best decision for the business. Or if I'm implementing something, I'm like, well, this is how I would do it, rather than saying, well, how should the team be utilizing this and how should the team do something? So, an example is we implemented, time tracking to see how much time the team is spending on work. And, I just rolled it out to the whole team all at once, and I said, you guys got to do this. It'll tell us if we're profitable, and, it's just what we're going to be doing now. And I didn't come at it from a like, okay, well, why should a creative person care about this? Like, why does a designer need to do this? And how can I message it to them to know that we're going to do this so that I can see how much time you're spending, so I can see you're overworking yourself, so that we can make a case to hire somebody else so that you have more time to focus on the work. So it's just more of like kind of a general philosophy of consistently kind of putting myself in the other person's shoes or the business lens of like what it really needs. And it's gotten better over time, but it's still something that I got to remind myself not to default to.
Well, I've made, I think, every possible mistake you can make, I'm sure. And I would agree with Jill too, that especially in a small team, and maybe even a large team, I mean, people are everything. So choosing the right person or the wrong person is one of the biggest things biggest mistakes you can make. But I guess, stepping away from that, I think that the biggest thing for me is the significance of sales, ultimately. I think that one of the things that used to be puzzling for me with our clients is very often how much, so like a lot of our work is kind of on the marketing side, and a lot of times, like marketing will have all kinds of great ideas that can be completely stomped out by the salesperson. Because at the end of the day, as a mentor of mine said once, they're closer to the piggy bank. They represent actual money. And that's true for a small company like ours, too. I mean, I think it's one of these things where, and I think that especially if you're coming at this from a, introverted creative people are, not the best salespeople naturally. And I think one of those things that is a skill that I've, tried to get better at over the years and try to educate myself about what it means for us and that kind of thing. But it's the lifeblood of any organization, right? It's like that's where the money comes from. So, and it seems kind of obvious, and yet it took me a long time to learn it.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned sales in that answer, because some of the questions that we're starting to get from the audiences are actually sales related, not surprisingly. Now, I know you guys haven't seen my office and where I work, but right when I walk into my office, I have a poster that it's like a frame piece of art that I have to stare at every day when I walk in my office. And it says, you can do anything, but not everything. So I have to look at it like every time I walk in. And I think that's actually kind of an important sales conversation. So let's start first with how you determine what kind of work you should be doing, and then maybe on top of that, touch a little bit on how are you going to go out and find the work. So I see that Megan here has asked, like, how do you get that initial client base? And again, I would say it's not just any client is right for you. You have to get that good client. So let's start there. And since you're holding the microphone, do you want to pick that up?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I try to address in my talk. Of course, I think that, I think a lot of it happens. It's one of these things where I've read a statistic once, and I think it's been true for us too, that you can do an amazing amount of planning, and yet it also often comes down to just people. So sometimes I think the longer you've been working, the more of a network you have, you wind up like somebody knows somebody, and you wind up getting work, or by reputation, I suppose. But I think so there's this difference between kind of this more passive PR and sort of relationship building and networking and all of that. But that's really different than sort of targeting in a much more kind of concerted way. And so what we have tried to do as an organization is to be that much more deliberate. I mean, it's really not unlike the problems that we try to help with our clients, where they're trying to target and what's a message and what's useful for the client, all of those kinds of things. We're trying to apply that same logic to ourselves. So it becomes much more about being discreet about certain populations of certain kinds of companies of what they either segmented by behavior or by demographic or by industry. There are ways that you can look at these things that can start to find common themes that would be useful and ways that you can actually provide value to them. So I mean that's the way we have been thinking about it anyway.
Yeah, and maybe one of you guys can also address, because Jody was curious, because many of you guys had talked about referrals, like getting your clients from referrals, in terms of after you've defined who this target market is, how can you just, instead of waiting for someone who knows that you're awesome to call you, how you can actively go out and market yourself?
I can just share that we've actually recently hired an independent contractor resource in that area as well to help us target specific. We've kind of tried to position ourselves a little bit more narrowly, as we understand, to help kind of target in a little bit better to find specific clients that we know we want to work with. And we've targeted geographically and just in a certain area. We've hired this person to help us with, and they make some initial calls, and we don't even talk to them if they're not qualified and want a phone call. So, and at that point, that person brings us in and brokers an introduction.
And I think people are curious, like you're doing this in lieu of a business developer. Is that how this is working?
We're actually augmenting on staff, an on-staff person, but that person is focused on another kind of line
Another
of
segment.
another service.
Okay. Okay, so you're exploring this new segment with this other resource. Okay, great.
Right, and so and we're also using our in-house person to ping our network, and using this outsourced person to go after people we wouldn't know.
Okay, sure. Actually, it looks like Seth has some more on that too. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say, kind of to state the obvious, there's a huge component that is actually having great work, right? You can target all you want and you can put yourself out in market, but if you don't have a staff that is able to create, exceptional work and have that be out in the world and seen, no amount of targeting is going to, I think, get clients to come and work with you.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say during the break, do you remember me telling you that I actually had to go get sales training because I'm like, a past creative, do not know what I'm doing in the sales department. I need to learn how to do this because it's a real discipline and a skill. So in addition to having the great work, you also do have great people that are putting your firm forward.
I just wanted to add, there's also a lot of inbound that does come in, either because you have work or clients or referrals or whatever, but it doesn't mean you should just always go after it. You still have to kind of do that kind of qualification and know it kind of fits with your strengths and everything, because we found that we've spent a lot of time and energy on things like that because we think it's more a higher percentage chance that it would close, and it actually doesn't wind up being that way.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're still in new business. Go ahead.
I would agree. I would agree with that 100%. I mean, I actually feel like these days it feels like an elaborate dating game of playing hard to get. It's like we try really, really hard to become desirable, and then we say like, no, wait a minute. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. So there's just kind of this weird thing that happens, but I think that's inherent in the process.
Yeah. Well, and also, Kevin, your firm chose to write a book. Has that exposure helped with the new business efforts? Like, has it raised the visibility? Is it helping you get the kind of clients you want? How has that worked in? How did that factor in?
At least for us, I think it's mostly about credibility. Mm-hmm. I think it helps a lot to just, rather than having our brochure, if like the book is just sort of like, okay, well, then take this. I mean, there's kind of this question of like, are you a legitimate enough resource? Can they believe what you're saying? Do they, do they see you as? I mean, it switches from like, let me give you my brochure to, they ask me, will you sign my book?
Yeah. Okay. Well, and maybe this follow-up question is for anyone. Let's think about the reverse. So obviously right now we've been focusing on how do we get some of these great people, but what do you do when someone approaches you with a project that, in your heart of hearts, you probably shouldn't be doing, but it's tempting for whatever reason because you think it's actually really cool and fun, or you think it might actually be a great portfolio piece, or you really like the person because it's your pizza delivery guy cousins, and you really like the pizza delivery guy, like you want to do them a favor. Like, when do you say no? And maybe more importantly, how do you say no? Because that's actually probably really tough, especially if it's been a while since that last gig came through. So what's the delicate art of saying no?
Well, I've gotten advice in the past that if you know it really is your heart of hearts not in the best interest of your company, one of the first things you can do is like ask an obscene amount of money for it, and that usually puts them off. And if it doesn't, then maybe you want to rethink it anyway if they accept your offer. And beyond that, it just is a matter of saying, contemplating. Once you ask more details about what the job is about, just saying it's not a fit for what you do, or for the amount of resources you have at the time, or something. It's not you, it's me.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Jen, has your team ever had to turn down a project? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. She's saying yes.
We, so obviously we struggle with, there's always more work than capacity. I think the way that we approach that problem, though, is that looking at the type of talent that we have, do we have the right people to do the right work, right? So a great example, we had a beauty campaign where the target audience was a Hispanic guest, and we looked internally to our team and realized that we actually didn't have the right type of creative talent that could do that body of work justice. And so that's when we make the decision that we actually need to either leverage an external agency or augment our staff in some meaningful way. But we probably say no to work more often than our internal partners would like us to say no, but yeah, it happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it was an easy diplomatic way because you're like, well, we can't do it justice. Like, we're not the right team.
Exactly.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. Yeah, so this is really about using our expertise as professionals, because sometimes people come to you and say, I have the answer, we need this, and you get a chance to advise them differently. How do you handle that?
I'll take a stab. So this, when I was speaking earlier, getting back to kind of having your own framework and philosophy for how you work, setting up what your approach is, how you tackle these brand challenges. You know, a lot of the times they'll expect you just to jump in and do the work, but if you're in the initial phases and you're showing them, hey, actually, we come in and we understand your brand for like the first 2 weeks, and then we do stakeholder interviews with your team, and we're actually going to co-write a brief on what we should be solving here, and setting that expectation before you even get into contract negotiations, they philosophically understand how you're going to approach their problem. I've found allows you or gives you the ability to have more leeway in kind of shifting what they might think their need is or what their approach is, or they may come to you and think they know who their customer is, but they're speaking to the wrong people. So if you kind of build into your process, we actually question these things to begin with, and we're going to give you the strategic point of view, and then we're going to get into the work. I've found that gives you at least the opportunity, and you may get into that and it doesn't shift and it's not the right relationship. You know, you may be trying to work with a Fortune 500 brand, and you go through your process and they say, actually, we don't want to shift and we only want to target this one customer demographic, and you may decide to walk away and say it's not right for us, but you at least set yourself up to know that you're going to try to get to that through your approach beforehand.
Do you share with them about this process during that business development phase up front?
I think
prior to engagement, meaning prior to being paid for sort of developing or co-authoring a brief.
How we've approached it, or I've approached it in the past, is that you tell them they will be challenged. You tell them that there's not going to, we are not just going to come in and give you the status quo. So if they're uncomfortable with that, then it might not be right. But if they're like, okay, we're willing to embrace that, then you may have a client on your hands that you're going to be able to shift their thinking and philosophy. Not every client wants to do that. There's plenty of them that have their dollars and they want to spend them in a certain way, and you're not going to shift it. But if you really want to, if that's the type of work that you want to be doing, you need to be telling them up front, the way we work best is we're going to make you uncomfortable. We're going to be challenging the status quo with you. Yeah. And if you don't want to do that, it may not be the right relationship.
Yeah, it may not be right for you. Yeah. But I think I think is a good distinction is when you're in that business development phase, you're not being paid yet. So you're not in that phase. You're there to solve the problem of helping them to decide to hire you. You haven't yet been paid to solve the problem. So I do want to make that distinction that even as you're going through this process and letting them know this is what to expect, they still need to hire you to solve the problem.
Yeah. They're buying how you will solve it and approach it. You're not giving them the work beforehand. Which is
tough when we love to solve problems, but that's not the problem we're tasked to solve right then. Sorry, did you have something else to add?
We're actually facing that right now in a couple different ways and have in the past. And a good number of our clients come from, or a good number of our business comes from clients, recurring business, different projects, new projects from clients that we've had over the years, either continual or they come back. And also clients, kind of friends and people who've been at those clients, and then they go and get new jobs, and then we have new work with an entirely new client because of that. So when that's the case, it's much easier to have a frank conversation with them when they talk about an engagement, and we kind of just rearrange the scope and the objective of a project right then. But we're actually currently in a situation where we have a new client, and based on the objectives they have, the deliverable isn't right, and we know that, and we are trying to kind of convince them that maybe the entire deliverable you're looking for it should kind of be held off, and this is what you need first. And that's much more difficult, and you can only go so far without maybe jeopardizing the ability to get the business in and work towards that. So a big factor is whether you have a relationship first, and this is an engagement that's add-on, or if it's a new engagement.
I guess I would say, I mean, I agree with everything that has been said here. I think, we try very hard to deliberately reframe the problem. I mean, it's like, that's the goal, like starting from day one. I guess from my perspective, I don't think I've met a business-oriented client that didn't want growth to be part of their, right? I mean, they're trying to increase sales, they're trying to do it, and I don't think it's my job to convince them otherwise, frankly. I think that saying that the deliberate, that the objective of the project is to just increase sales or whatever or be financial or be profitable, is kind of like saying, my objective for today is to not die. That's like saying I need food and water, and it's like, yeah, that's obvious. Of course you want to make money. But the question is how. Like, what are you actually trying to do? How can you be more meaningful to customers? What are you actually trying to achieve here? What's the goal? Trying to, deliberately reframe what's the problem you're trying to solve, and is this tactic going to do that? Probably not on the face of it. So, to me, it's a deliberate. I don't have to get into solving the problem to just state that out front.
Sure. Yeah. So the question was about a financial manager, and do you mean an outside consultant or someone that you're trying to hire for your studio?
Outside consultant.
Outside consultant. Okay.
There's two. There's two types of financial managers that I've seen and worked with. There's going to be one that's really much more the accounts payable. Like, they're the ones just processing invoicing, making sure that you have, a cash flow document that you can review and that you can sit down and go through with. And if you are able to have more of a strategic mind in understanding the finances, then that's great. Someone like that is going to help, especially in the early days. But as you start to grow, the other part, and usually this is a different skill set, is someone who can approach financials more strategically. And in those situations, you can start to ask questions, around how would you, approach like revenue deferral, or how would you think about like what should we do with our profits this year? These are our business priorities, and that's a very different skill set than accounts payable and processing. So I would say actually that's one of the other things that shifts as your business grows. In the beginning, you just want someone that's going to manage it, make sure you're compliant. If you get audited, you can answer those questions. And as you start to grow and get a little bigger, you're going to really want someone that can think more strategically and that help you understand like where you should be putting your money. What could you be doing, to really have greater tax savings while also reinvesting in your business. Someone that can help tell you like, should you be an LLC or should you switch to being an S Corp or a C Corp? And I would say it shifts as you grow, but you're going to need someone with more of a strategic focus as you get bigger.
A lesson learned for us is we have on staff kind of an accounts payable, accounts receivable person who handles that in their full time. We do have a need for a strategic person, but we don't have we can't offer that full-time work. We're about 10 people. We have so we have hired that person on a kind of as-needed basis. They give us like certain hours a month. But I will say a lesson learned from that person is I personally would advise you to find somebody who's very knowledgeable about the creative industry, because we just hired an accountant, CPA person who ran their own firm, and they came in with that mindset, and very much about the hourly mindset and chargeability and hitting the numbers in that way, and not really understanding what it means, like what value pricing is and what the value of intellectual property is, and other ways, if you're not hitting profitability, but there are reasons about, having to go back and do this because otherwise you would have lost the client, or this person might look on paper very highly billable, but their skill sets are very lacking. And, there's just so many things I had to explain to this person, and we wound up parting ways with them. So that would be my advice.
Sure. Tips on, so you're saying at this point, you're not looking for tips on how to decide to fire a client, but you know that they're not good for you, and how do you handle that?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Once you've made your mind up, how do you go about it?
Oh, goodness.
Well, I'll start more on like the tactical side, is to understand what's in your contracts and agreements for parting ways. Oftentimes there'll be notification periods where if no one's breaching anything, you need to give 30 days notice, you need to give 60 days notice. That very often is to protect the agency, but it's also there, to make sure the client can still get the work that they need in a reasonable time period. So I'd start with that, and then, if you've made the decision, what I've found is, it can't come all at once. It can't just be like a rip off a Band-Aid and, we're not working together. There needs to be some attempt at, remediation. So whether that's setting up just a relationship discussion and saying, hey, our team's really struggled with, the way we've received feedback, or it's been difficult to respond as quickly as you need. That may shift it into them saying, well, we can give you more money, or we can look at revisiting the scope. And after you've had that discussion or two, it then gets to the point where it just isn't mutually not working out. So I would say, if you are okay with your legalese to be able to do it, and then you've had a discussion, I think the next step is just to say that you need to part ways. I mean, it happens and it's unfortunate, but you can probably leave a relationship that has a door to reopen, or even, they can even recommend somebody to you in the future if you do it in a way that feels a little more strategic and planned than just like, I'm done with this, I'm walking away.
I think of like photographers too. Like, do I want the person who's going to do my wedding photography to also be awesome at industrial photography? Do I care about that? Or do I want someone that's just really good at wedding photography? In terms of like how you're marked, even if it's the same photographer that does both. So.
Yeah, I mean, so I think trying to be clear about what it is how you intend to, offer value, as I was talking earlier about, I think that is important. I think that design is a very broad term, and it means a lot of different things. Yeah. And I think that there are designers who rely heavily on illustration and are and often illustrators or a photographer, people sometimes they essentially have a style in a sense. And I think that they become sought after for that style. And so that's a way to sort of, categorize, an individual in a certain way, and or organizations. Sometimes those kinds of designers wind up, their clients largely wind up being other agencies who are hiring them for that style, or a corporate kind of context, right? Because they're known for that. Yeah. Other organizations may choose to, try very hard to not have a style, and I don't know if that's even possible because it's, but it's true about, and I think, we actually fall into that camp. I try not to, we're trying to reflect the character of the organization we're working with, but I think that's, that also means that we have less, sort of illustrative kind of designers with this a personal part of this, that they're bringing to the table to begin with. I mean, they're obviously bringing their own personal creativity, but it's a different thing than if you're, have a sort of a particular style. Yeah. So I don't know your particular situation, but I think it's just making a choice about what are you trying to build? What are you offering? What is the core competency on this front? And I think, it even goes into not to kind of bend back to the previous question about the kind of work, but I've thought about how, do you think about what you do as being kind of a surgeon having a consulting kind of, where you perform a certain action and then you're out? Or are you in the long-term care business? Yeah. What is the nature of your relationship with the client? What are you seeking? I think that's, just being as clear as you can about because I think that changes the dynamics of how hard it is to, walk away from a client relationship, or how you position the organization.
Well, and from what I heard from that, just to go back to your question, is it sounds like you would definitely advise him, if he's targeting different audiences, to set up different marketing efforts. So in this case, you may actually create different marketing for one, and they might even realize that you do this other stuff because they may not need it. So it sounds like the more you can narrow that and target, the better. I know we're almost out of time, and I'm curious, since I know there's also some freelancers in here, you mentioned that you're talking about kind of striking on your own, maybe even some just final closing thoughts on how freelancers can better collaborate with in-house or agency teams?
We augment our staff often with freelancers, and we actually struggle internally to have a deep bench, right? So to your point of where are those experts and what is the expertise and what are those individuals, we have people that we go to, we kind of keep going back to, because not only did they bring the right talent, but they also were really great to work with, right? So they collaborated, they added value to the team. And I think to your point, if you have sort of multi-dimensional skill sets, that's awesome. I think it's great to really focus on what you can consistently bring that people can rely on you for. But we first look at relationships. We actually have a resource on our team that can kind of post jobs and stuff like that, and we almost never use that internally because it's all built on relationships. So has someone worked with someone on a project in their past? What was that like? What was the work? And we're always looking for great talent because we're always augmenting our staff up and down.
Yeah, I would just say communication is key. And are they receptive to criticism and feedback, constructive criticism? Because, you can't control the method and means by which they work, but you are responsible for the deliverable. So there's a lot of collaboration there. And if they're, a little overly defensive about that, we have to get over that. And it is about the relationship. And if there are conversations to be had or issues to escalate, nip that in the bud. We've had to talk to our very trusted resources, even more recently, about things like, in that client meeting, you use the I a little too much and not the we, and issues like that. And as long as you're communicating, and like I said, at Baker, because of the resources we hire, there's a lot of brainstorming that we do together. We ask them to come in and do that. We'll do it by phone. And they appreciate that and like that. So it's very mutual, and if you treat your resources that you outsource well, they'll come back to you as well.
Well, sure. Well, I wish we had been able to touch more on collaboration between resources, but we are out of time. I can't believe how fast that went. So if y'all could help me say a lovely goodbye to the panelists. Thank you for sharing it. And to you guys as well for sticking it through. I hope you guys enjoyed this topic. I think it's so important for all of you out there, and I'm glad to be part of it today. So y'all have a wonderful lunch break. Thank you.